what it's going to make a beautiful future. Our ability to actually hear each other instead of talking at each other. Deep listening, when done properly, is about sensing and hearing what is beneath words or beneath what is being shown. Deep listening employs the whole body and asks us to be soft enough to hold a meta view that is always made up of multiplicities. Listening is a tool to learn and widen our perspectives.
Hello, dear ones. The deeper we get into what this year is bringing to the surface, the clearer it comes to be that deep listening and intuition are the skills we need to cultivate, and that they are linked to each other. My book, Intuition, is released a week today in the UK and Australia, and then on the 19th of January for the USA and Canada. It's available everywhere, though, for pre-order, and I have put together a gift package for those that do, including the PDF of the extra chapter I wrote for the audio edition, some of my favourite practices, and a launch party. This will happen on Sunday, December the 6th, and you are invited. Simply head over to www.amisha.co.uk/intuition for more details of everything about this book. Pre-orders really help authors out in this day and age, as it determines where the book will be sold more widely. And launch parties are important for authors because it's so important that we celebrate in community. My experiences of the Women's Summit Style and Presence recently reminded me how powerful it is to gather in whatever ways we can. And although we might not be able to gather in the ways that we want to, we must utilize the technology that we have so that we can stay connected and keep learning from each other, inspiring each other, and celebrating each other. This book, Intuition, is laid out in a very simple, non-woo-woo kind of way to guide you deeper into self-knowledge. Everything from understanding your brainwaves to learning how to be an edge walker, somebody who moves between worlds, to practices that can support you in your relationship with your intuition. The book is broken down into 9 principles and 53 practices. I feel that so many of the answers we might be looking for in our collective story are here, lying in the potentiality of our intuitive intelligence, waiting to be listened to. My guest this week is Kailea Frederick, a mother of Tahltan, Kaska and Black American ancestry. Her work sits at the intersection of climate justice, spiritual ecology, and resilience thinking. Growing up off-grid in Maui, Hawaii, forever imprinted in her the importance of reciprocity through Indigenous worldview. She feels raised by quiet spaces and intimately tied to Honua, our island Earth. Her prayer is that those on the front lines of climate change and extractive-based industry are able to find justice and peace for their communities. She is a graduate of the International Youth Initiative Program and a Spiritual Ecology and Boards and Commissions Leadership Fellow. She has served twice as a youth delegate to the United Nations Climate Change Conferences. Currently, Kailea is the editor for Loam, a climate commissioner for the city of Petaluma, and a facilitator through her own project, Earth Is Ohana. She co-authored Compassion in Crisis, Learning to Live in an Age of Disaster. This podcast episode is part of a series of 8 conversations called Listening to Each Other, Listening to Earth. This series is a collaboration with St. Ethelburga's Centre for Reconciliation and Peace in London, and funded by the Kailea Foundation. St. Ethelburga's builds community resilience for times of ecological and social emergency through practical collaborative action. They aspire to courageously face the realities of the landscape we are in, whilst also holding a vision for regeneration, for a just and inclusive world, rooted in care for each other and our common home. Their work is organised around 4 principles, which are put values into action, seek opportunity in crisis, build community across differences, and protect what is sacred. Listening to each other, listening to Earth reaches for the place where spiritual ecology and climate justice meet. It explores the integration of spirituality with grounded action through the lives and leadership of people of colour. In this conversation called The Quiet Revolutions Inside Our Hearts, we explore the themes of reflective activism, parenting, and climate justice as we contemplate the question, what kind of world could we believe in and tend to through practices of deep listening? We hope that you enjoy this episode and that it opens up deeper capacity within to listen. Welcome to The Future is Beautiful, with me, your host, Amisha Gadiali. On this show, we explore the weave between politics, spirituality, creativity, and sustainability. It's time for us to move beyond silos and into an integrated way of being. Every one of us has ideas and personal experiences to share that can lead us to a brighter future. This is the revolution. Despite the challenges we face as a global community or the pressures that we meet in our daily lives, when we stop and dare to dream, to ask ourselves the big questions and to share what we are already doing, we create the future that we wish to wake up for. That future is beautiful. I am absolutely delighted, Kailea, to welcome you to The Future is Beautiful. And I love that we are both sitting next to the ocean, listening to her waves at very different ends of the day and different ends of the world.
Yes. You're in the UK.
I'm in Devon in the UK, on the southwest coast of the UK.
Mm-hmm. And I'm on the island of Maui. So I'm all the way in the Pacific Ocean right now, just starting out my day. And it's amazing that technology allows us to do this little meeting in the middle with time travel somehow.
Absolutely. I wonder what moves for you when I ask, what does it mean to listen to each other and listen to Earth?
I think the first thing that comes into my heart is all the ways that we haven't been taught oftentimes to know how to do that level of listening. It's such a potent question, especially in this moment in time where there's a lot of, I want to say, almost talking over instead of actually leaning in towards each other. Deep listening, for anyone who, is a friend of mine and already familiar with me, as you know, is one of my most favorite practices. It's something I, as a facilitator in group settings, and consistently trying to support participants in dropping into. It's really how I think of what it's going to make a beautiful future, our ability to actually hear each other instead of talking at each other. So that's what comes up for me. I actually love this question. I would love to hear from you as well, how it is that you are orienting around this idea of listening in the practice.
Thank you. Nobody's asked me that question back yet. I was walking here at the weekend. This is a wild beach, with the cold waves and these rocks. And I was walking with the rocks and I was feeling that expanse of the wildness move through my entire system. And I was like looking at the rocks and looking at the patterns in the rocks, feeling this deep sense of aliveness and connection. I was actually feeling into that. It's been 3 years exactly this week since we started the podcast. And I didn't realize somebody that listens in our community had sent me a screenshot with the date of the first episode. And I was like,
That's so sweet.
Yeah, really nice. And as I was reflecting on this birthday, I was feeling into how being part of this project has taught me how to listen and how to listen deeply in both the ways that it's invited me to listen to people in the way of these conversations, and that it also empowered me to listen in a way that I hadn't been taught to listen, to have conversations in the way that I hadn't been taught media was done, to offer these spaces really of the heart, these spaces of connection, these spaces where so much is said behind, between, underneath, above, next to the words, and yet travels through the words. Yeah, that for me is something that's been a really beautiful part of this, and that also to be able to listen to Earth, you know, so many people that I talk to through this podcast, but also through my own practices and life's unfolding, they listen. It's part of their way of being. They're in a constant communication and dialogue with the earth, with the elements, with the rocks, with the trees. And that wasn't how I was raised, yet it's so natural to me. And I used to do it secretly to be allowed to do it, to have had to work through some serious shame about that is something that I find quite interesting. I've just written a book about intuition that's coming out, and
congratulations.
Thank you. And that for me, you know, it is about listening, really. It is about deep listening. It's listening with our whole selves, and not just our whole selves, like our whole individual self, but our collective self as well. Being able to listen in the spaces that look like they're between you and I, but they're not, right? Yeah, that's what opens up for me with that question today.
It's one of the biggest themes in my life. It's this practice of deep listening as one of the, I would say, one of the tools that should really be in each of our toolboxes that have oriented not just my work around, but really my own life and how it is that I, you know, navigate and move through the world throughout my 20s. It's been a big one for me. And I actually, as we were talking, was remembering that I had written, you know, this June, in the wake of George Floyd's death, in the midst of so much turmoil, had written this short little slide deck on Instagram that I would love to read, called "What is Deep Listening and How Do You Practice It?" For those of you who, you know, are not in this platform, there had been a week where there had been essentially a call put out for accounts to be muted, for everyone to, for a moment, to put forward these black squares and just to say, I'm listening, for those of us that do not identify as Black or African American or person of deep melanin. And so I'm just going to read this little post I had put together. At the start of the week, there was a call put out for an active state of deep listening. This call manifested through the muting of accounts in honor of listening to melanated voices. Now that we are on the last day of the week and I'm noticing accounts beginning to be reactivated, I wanted to speak to what deep listening is, because deep listening is not generally taught to us in our homes, schools, or workplaces. And therefore, most people have no idea how to actually do this, which means that collectively as a culture and society, we have very little understanding about how to use listening as a tool to learn and widen our perspectives. So how do you practice deep listening? Here are a few key points to remember. While sitting in the listener seat, you are actively listening, which means that you're not searching for a response. Your role is to create space for the person sharing and to practice quieting the part of your mind that wants to interject, create a conversation, and/or debate. I put the word practice here because deep listening is its own type of mindfulness exercise. It's hard work to stop the mind chatter that many of us are accustomed to filtering in and out of while someone is speaking to us. When I do deep listening exercises with groups of people, often it goes like this. A pair of people sit. One person is in the listening seat, the other is sharing. The person sharing is allowed to use the allotted amount of time however they like. They can talk, be silent, draw, move their body. The listener's task is to just listen and witness. At the end of the amount of time, the listener then reflects back to the person what they heard or witnessed. They don't bring their internal process or their own thoughts. This is the gift, because just as many of us don't know how to listen, many of us, by consequence, haven't been given the space to be heard or witnessed. So taking this into consideration, what would be an appropriate way for you to come back into posting after this week? Here are a few thoughts. Refrain from jumping back into your regularly scheduled program. Instead, start by taking a moment to sit and reflect with yourself about what it was like for you to inhabit the seat of the listener over this last week. Here are a few prompts. What did you learn from listening? Was it hard? If so, why? What is a new understanding you have or are coming to? Note, understanding is different than agreement. We listen first as an act of understanding and to widen our perspectives, which sometimes overlaps with agreement, but not always. And then what are some new questions you are sitting with? While writing this, I came across these words from my friend Aki Hirata Baker. Quote, I want to hear the words that we do not utter because we are so tired. End quote. Deep listening, when done properly, is about sensing and hearing what is beneath words or beneath what is being shown. As a facilitator, this is the layer I aim to work in. Deep listening employs the whole body and asks us to be soft enough to hold the meta view that is always made up of multiplicities. Consider that if you were really deeply listening while muted over this last week, that your initial posts might not be about your response and or process. Instead, it might be more oriented towards the prompt. Over the last week, I heard, witnessed, learned. What type of friend and ally could you become? Could we all become if we continue to decenter our own narratives as an act of gift giving to those who have not been heard or witnessed for so long? And then sit with this last thought. The fight for clarity might be as simple as learning how to listen. That's how much I love deep listening.
Such beautiful, potent words and such a clear explanation and invitation.
Thank you.
It's something that I find, when I first started to take part in sharing circles and in spaces where listening, receiving somebody, witnessing somebody was offered, how potent it was and how many of us are conditioned to kind of jump in to try and save or to fix or to kind of pull in a different direction or whatever it is. And that power in just letting somebody share, letting someone express, letting them move through it and not in a way where like that means something's wrong. And as a facilitator, you see everyone like jumping up, being like, trying to, they want to go and give if someone's crying or something, they want to give the tissues, they want to give the hugs, they want
comforting.
Yeah. And it's like, just let them be. It's not wrong or bad to be sharing some emotion and what might happen for that person if they're witnessed. Yeah. For me, that witnessing is such a beautiful thing because something happens to us when we're witnessed. Something happens to us when we finish that sentence that never gets finished.
It's the unraveling somehow, like the opportunity to be given space to somehow it's like a massaging and a shedding that can happen. While you were speaking, actually, I thought of the word reciprocity. I think this is why this practice is so important to me, is that it's the gift giving is on both ends. I know that for me, when I'm really given the space to be heard, And to somehow, especially if it's about a big topic, if it's about race relations, if I really feel like I'm being listened to, it creates or generates somehow a feeling of abundance inside of me. And that all of a sudden, I want to be able to give more from that space of being heard. I want to listen back. I want so much of my process throughout my 20s, but I feel like this year it's really coming to a head for all the obvious, main talking points of politics and the pandemic, and how is it that racism is still alive and definitely in some areas thriving is very much a systemic issue. I've been just yearning for a way for us to somehow be more generative in these dialogues with each other. This morning I woke up thinking we need more common goals. We need somehow to become more generous with each other in the invitation, really towards working together somehow. But I think we're missing, that point of what we're even inviting each other into. Because I actually think at the end of the day, we care about a lot of the same things. And I've been missing that over the last year. I've been missing that in our collective conversations. More of the questioning along the lines of, what do you care about? And how does it intersect with what I care about? And how can we figure out a way to talk about that and walk that together? I mean, I actually would love to just kind of get into that and talk about that with you, but where have you been situating yourself in just this discombobulated lack of deep listening that has been this year within our societies and our community members and our friends and family?
I've actually had a year of deep listening with this space through this podcast and the online community aspect presence that's part of this. Like, we've been able to just really hold space through what's been happening. I spent a part of this year living in a treehouse, writing a book on intuition. So that was deep listening. Then my father died and I was with him for that transition. I've been with my mother since then. Yeah. So I don't know. I've had a year that somehow, through everything that's kind of happening on the outside, that's happening in our politics and with this pandemic, I have been in a place where I've had a personal invitation to go deeper into that space of listening, deeper into my intuition, deeper into my connection with nature. Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying it's been an easy year whatsoever, but I feel like the tools that I have been cultivating over the past 15 years have served me well this year and allowed me to hold space for many other people, which is, what it was always about for me. It's been nice that that's happened. And yeah, I mean, definitely, I am not in a relationship at the moment, and I've been living in a place where I don't have physical friends and communities. So it's also been a really long time since I've had a cuddle, so it's not been without its challenges, 2020. For me, part of the living of deep listening is that you can listen beyond where all the noise is. Yeah, I'm scared of all of the polarity and the playing against each other and everything that's happening and what that's doing to us. I'm scared of all the enforced separation and the breaking down of our communities. And yet I still feel very connected. That's my offering at this time. And that's kind of where my energy is at how can we root down, rise up in relationship with what we have access to? How can we support each other through that? Yeah, I'm not trying to get involved in all of it as well. There's been a sense of like, here's where what I've got the energy for and the capacity for. And I suppose, I mean, I'm also a curator of a project that is all about shared values, that space where we meet. That also allows me to feel a lot of that in my day to day. And that's just me. That's not like an accurate picture of the world in 2020. Yeah, what is that for you? What are you feeling around this space of shared values and how we move into it?
First, and just direct response to what you brought forward, wanting to honor, it sounds like all that you cultivated over the last years of your life, you've been able to really draw on and somehow instill into just your own day-to-day experience. And I heard you say the way that you're able to hold space for people in your own life, and also just wanting to honor and acknowledge the transition of your father. I'm sure that was I'm sure that was a huge deal. It makes me happy actually just to hear you reflect back that you in some ways have been feeling, sounds like your well has sustained despite so much. I've really been, trying to just acknowledge and celebrate people in these moments of like happiness, or where they're able to find moments of joy throughout this year. So just wanting to acknowledge that you're sustaining in the ways that you can.
Yeah, we've been having some community Zoom dance parties and they've been really
Oh
helpful.
God. The creative ways we've been coming together has been also just beautiful to kind of be like, oh, we actually have there's a lot that life goes on. Like we've been forced in some ways to be in this paused, almost liminal state, but the reality is that life goes on. And even though there's been hard moments, a lot of people transitioning into ancestors throughout this year, there's also things like my nephew turning 1 yesterday and my brother proposing to the mother of his child in front of all the family during his son's birthday. And these little moments that really just make my heart expand. So that's all real too, and so valid and important. Also just going back to, I guess I feel I'm seeing a lack in, I think it's important for some of the listeners to know that I am a really involved person. I am definitely a political person. I am the vice chair on the climate commission for the city of Petaluma, where me and my family live. So I very much work in local governance, and people powered policy is how I like to frame me showing up into that space. And so much more. I've been feeling a lack in the bridge building, though. That has been really painful for me. A part of that lack has actually, in this moment of crisis and fall apart and cracking, within these big systems, but also within our own communities and in our own families, where there's really this question of how do we get to the other side, or what is my part to play in this, or how do I make this better? In the lack of the bridge building, what I'm seeing a systemic issue in is the deeper inquiry in how it is that each of us think or understand or comprehend change coming about. And I'm really seeing that our societies and our education systems and our families haven't set us up for success, and that we haven't been posed the question, what is your theory of change? How does your theory of change connect to other people's theories of change? How do you understand your role in our shared, interconnected world? How do you understand it in relationship to others who look different than you, who are navigating a different aspect of society? I'm seeing instead so much tear down of each other, tear down of each other's characters, tear down of each other's roles in society, and a real kind of boxing in of, this is what it looks like for you to be a good ally here or here or here. You look this way, or your work is oriented in this really, core specific direction, and it doesn't talk at all to that other area in society. I'm finding it really unrealistic and short-sighted. So that's been hard. That's been really hard. And as someone who is truly intersectional by nature, I'm a First Nations Black woman who works in local governance, but has a background in grassroots organizing. Over this year, I have felt very kind of nudged around, kind of jostled, this feeling of you don't really belong here or here or here. Just how painful that has been on a personal level, because I know it's not true. I know that we can be complex in our vision for the worlds that we want to see. I know we can be complex in how it is that we decide to knit together different identities that each of us holds, and complex in the relationships that we decide to build around, despite having real differences about how it is that we are choosing to have a life, our lifestyle choices, the basic day-to-day levels. So that's what's been sitting in my heart pretty heavily over the last year. I work as an editor for this arts and environmental publication called Loam. So over at Loam, we're doing a lot of visioning into 2021. We decided that our visioning is really oriented around what it is that we want to be building, not letting ourselves get paused or stopped in these confrontations and this kind of tackling of each other that we do, that we're really looking into uplifting the narratives and the voices of people who are in the work right now and are ready to get to work and are truly holding relationships at the center and the core of the work that they do. That all to say, that's been a little bit of my remedy as well, that heart pain I've been holding.
It's one of those things, isn't it, where I feel like for many years I was waiting for that moment that was like the wake up moment where everyone would like change their behavior, and the systems being everyone as well. And then things just keep happening and they keep happening. And every time I go, yes, it's now. In March, I was definitely like, okay, everything's changing now. This has never happened before. Like,
I felt that way too.
Flights have never stopped, and people are going to realize. And then you see the bailing out of like you see who's bailed out and who's not. And you see where funding's going and where it's being taken away from, and the rich getting richer and the poor getting poorer, and some of the most harmful industries getting the most support. And then it's like,
I think also those who can afford to hold a perspective that is oriented around language like, I'm so over this pandemic, or I'm so tired of life being altered and shifted. I think we could all hold that truth if we really wanted to, because I think we're all tired of it to a certain degree. But who gets to act on that? It has been really telling for me, as far as those in my community who are deciding that that's the truth that they want to orient around right now.
I mean, we all want to hug and dance and gather. And yet when bits of the country, bits of the world like opened up, and what behaviors like reemerged, or what really people were waiting to be able to do again. Yeah. And then at the same time, I don't know, because I feel like we don't really know what's going on for people, and we're being fed certain like media perspectives. I'm getting more and more skeptical of like whether or not that's true, because I feel like there has been so much community coming together during this year on a local scale in a way that's like not reported about, not shared. You wouldn't know in those quiet, invisible ways that people support each other, that there is a lot of that happening this year.
I think there is a lot of that happening everywhere in every community. People are creatively coming together. Last year, myself and Kate Weiner, the co-founder of Loam, co-edited this book called Compassion in Crisis, Learning to Live in an Age of Disaster. And it's a compilation of interviews with different people who either work in disaster management or who have lived through large-scale disaster. The resounding theme that surfaces from these different perspectives and stories that people share, post this experience, is that community care is really the way forward. Finding our way to each other before crisis hits is a core part of how we have resilience within and after, how we become stronger as communities. I definitely subscribe to the idea that communities are creatively coming together right now. I know it. I know it's true. I know it's true in the communities that I call home.
And there's many people that don't have a sense of what that is.
Yeah, we came out to the island of Maui where we're located right now, where I grew up, and we're staying on my family's land, my childhood home. We've been here since the beginning of September because of the fires in Sonoma County where we live. So we actually evacuated the state of California. It has just been, I think, eye-opening to explore both of these places.
Well, I wanted to ask, because I know you grew up off-grid. I wonder what your relationship is with listening to Earth.
Well, on this trip, it's been very present. It's loud right now. I feel like my present experience of this house is that we're staying in is really loud. You can't ignore Earth at the moment. We're on this ridge line, and the winds and the rain arrived a few weeks ago. And so there's a tin roof, and every night when we get home, if we leave the house, we have to walk across the yard. It's like this big open like wind tunnel between the car and the house. And we're moving through rain that is like coming in at us sideways. And then it sounds in our house like being in a wave all of the time. So I feel really present to the obvious listening and sensory experience of life for us at this moment in time. I also feel this other level as someone who has been exploring the areas of climate change for the last about 7 years now through different areas. I initially got really interested in looking at large ecosystems through soil. I worked on an organic farm for 6 years between the ages of, I started at 19 into my mid-20s. And also used to live on a homestead with my last partner where we grew a lot of our food. And we were really, really interested in soil health and community health, food sovereignty. And then that blossomed into looking at all the ways that soil is being impacted because of desertification and these other large, big events that we find ourselves in the midst of. Now, as a climate commissioner in California, in a place that's being heavily impacted by wildfires, I spent this whole last year actually working on what is called a climate emergency framework, which is going to be a guiding document for the city regarding our general plan and any other plans we put together oriented around this topic, looking at data and numbers and what it is that we are probably going to be living through in our lifetimes and our children will be living through in their lifetimes. Yeah, it's another level of listening. Right before the winds and rain arrived here, it was like a record long drawn out summer and high heat here in the islands as well, which I could tell in California, we've been going through droughts and high heats for years, but I could tell it was almost new for people here, and this kind of feeling of like discomfort hitting people. Like, it's October and we're still getting days in the 80s and the 90s, and it's relentless. And now, I think the weather projections are, it's going to be a wetter than normal winter for the islands. And I was just talking with my auntie about this last night, just how this level of observation and listening that I feel I'm so just in, through my work currently, we're living into imbalance ultimately. How it's going to be kind of this, I think, a swinging of a pendulum, extreme heats to extreme rains. And then the big question mark that I think every community faces, unpredictability and the not knowing of when a big, type of disaster might hit as well. It's kind of a long-winded answer, but that's definitely a part of my listening practice at this moment. When I think about listening to Earth, it's also listening to data and charts and trying to figure out how to communicate to my loved ones about this big change and transition we're experiencing right now.
Hello. We're taking a short pause from the conversation. On behalf of our team and our community, thank you for being here and co-creating The Future is Beautiful. Much dedication, love, and time goes into the production of this show. We believe in being advertising free in a world that's always trying to sell us stuff we don't need. And so we make this show with you and for you, thanks to your support. There are 3 ways you can be more involved, so we can share the vision, wisdom, and creativity here as we explore what it means to be a human in this time. You can support the podcast by sharing it with your friends, posting episodes on social media, and doing iTunes reviews. You can support as a patron by making a monthly or one-off donation of your choice. And with this, you join the Global Patrons group and monthly video calls where we share connection and insight. You get to know the other amazing patrons from around the world, their stories and their work, and you offer direct support to me and the team, as well as being brought into the behind the scenes of creating something like this. It sounds like a lot, but it's as much or as little as you want to get involved in. You can become a member of Presence, our membership collective of care and practice, where we explore how to embody the themes of the podcast with workshops, calls, special events, tree whispers, and powerful tools, practices, and rituals that you can bring into your life. This is open to absolutely everybody as we create an inclusive and diverse space that celebrates well-being as a human right, where we explore together what it means to be creative, courageous, and connected to ourselves, each other, and the earth. This is about embodying sacred activism. We love meeting patrons and Presence members and how being part in this way weaves our lives together, as well as making this show possible. If anything from this conversation has moved or inspired you, please get more involved. All information can be found at www.thefutureisbeautiful.co/community. This show really can't go on without your patronage and Presence membership, so please do make it happen. And now, back to the conversation. How do you feel we live with this kind of understanding of transition? Because for many people, that is just too much to really comprehend. It's like, okay, I can evacuate for a few days. And then what? This is now more months of a year. This is now happening. Like, how does this become normal and part of our existence? How do we handle that? How do we resource ourselves in resilience?
Honestly, I think just talking about it. I know for myself, the things that keep me up at night are the things that I'm not talking about enough, with a family member or with a group of friends. The stuff I'm somehow stuffing down, it's so big and so scary. And that might be related to this topic or all the fears that a parent carries, about, their children. But I just know for myself, the actual act of creating spaces, opening spaces for a dialogue to happen, I think is at the very first place. And that was so much of why Kate and I put together Compassion in Crisis, it was part our own process of living through these big, Kate lives in Boulder, so also big fire seasons there, these changing times and the anxiety that both of us were just kind of sitting in. So for us, the process of actually applying ourselves to a project oriented around some of our worst fears helped to kind of just unknot that space in each of us, because we were just immersed in it through some of the people that we were able to speak to, specifically the people who work in disaster management, providing us some language to work with as well helps. Because sometimes it's like we don't even know how to language the feelings. That has been a big part of it. I think more people should consider talking, with each other. And, again, just going back to the start of the conversation, spaces where we can be really heard, and we can bring some of our big fears forward, spaces that aren't going to be judgmental, where we can just talk it out. The second part of our book is all actually oriented around resources. So we had this amazing contribution from a woman named Summer Star, who put together these incredible comprehensive lists on how to prepare a grab bag if you need to leave in the middle of the night, how to prepare your home, which, if you live in a place where you're prone to earthquakes, or if you are living through a pandemic, we actually ended up using some of her lists, like how do you actually prepare your home to hunker down in it? What are medical supplies that you need? Just kind of the nuts and bolts. And then we also had two people come in that provided some support around preparing an herbal kind of pantry for yourself and the supporting your nervous system through somatics. We wanted to provide just a really holistic invitation into the topic of living into a climate changed, crisis prone world, which sounds strange, maybe a world that we know is going to be going through big transitions in our lifetime. How do you sit with it? Do you, I know everyone is different, so would love to hear from you.
Well, I resonate with what you're sharing, in that I spend a lot of my time like asking these questions and in these explorations. And that means that it's not in the shadow for me. It's a fully embraced part of my life, that this is the time that we live in. And I feel that talking to various different people on different aspects of it makes it more tangible for me. And then my spiritual practices have been so helpful. They really help me to be more present and more connected, and like able to have that grounded hope of what is possible, what could be possible, and also have that resilience with what's challenging and what's difficult. And, I don't know. I think I stopped trying to solve the whole thing. That helped me. I spent a lot of time trying to solve the whole thing for everyone. I let that go. Perhaps as any save the world person in recovery, part of my recovery has been enjoying the simplicity of life more. And so, it's interesting when you were asking me earlier about this year. This year's been quite simple for me. It's been deep conversations and dancing through the Zoom space. and then it's been like my mum and the trees in like real life. So It's been really simple, and that's been helpful. And of course, I'm part of lots of interesting networks and communities of conversations and people with all kinds of amazing ideas and initiatives. And that gives me some energy of like, yes, new paradigm and death and rebirth and kind of deep adaptation and this sense of transition. I accept where we are. And with that, I accept where I am in my own life as well. And that makes it easier to focus on what is my role, like what's my dharma in all of this, where can I show up, how can I be resourced, and how can I be part of that web and that tapestry, and kind of find my, just be weaving my thread in it. Yeah, that's what's coming today. I feel like, I don't know, today feels this like this landing day as well, after some big holdings. I just held this big women's summit last weekend over Diwali. We had women from all over the world. Perhaps in a way that was one of my kind of ways of thriving, was that I was feeling like I was missing my community, and in particular missing my sisterhood. So I just gathered them. We had 52 women speaking over the weekend of Diwali. Wow. In a reclamation of worth. We had women from all over the world taking part, and then I felt really connected again. So that's also part of, I guess, the way that I approach these things, that when I feel like, oh, like we need this, I need this, then if I have the resource, then I create it. And, and I always check for the resource. This summit idea was coming very strongly. Part of me was worried it was too much for me to pull off. And I guess also as a recovering save the world person, I like to check in and make sure that I'm not pushing too much with ego, like through something. But I went for a walk in the forest. I really asked in the forest, is this summit right? Is it too much for me? Is this the right timing for it? Is it needed? And I got lots of yeses, and I actually got given like a format for it that made it much easier to organize, and then went with it. Yeah, I open up to that guidance and follow those instincts and the intuition. And so right now I'm feeling really full. I feel all these women in my field still, and that feels really good. And it was Diwali, and so we were all, shining that inner light of truth. And it was beautiful to celebrate, because I couldn't host a Diwali party for local friends. And so I found another way of celebrating and honoring. How do your practices and your perspective, perhaps some of the cultural ways that you understand our relationships, how does that support you in your perspective?
One reoccurring thought that has come forward over the last year, and it came just when you were sharing about, just wanting to recognize that I think we're having, in some ways, divergent experiences of this moment. I really resonated when you were sharing just about this asking to bring women together, like your friends together, for a moment of just co-creation and celebration. And I really thought, like, wow, where I feel wealthiest is in my relationships. I feel really held by the web that I'm a part of, and the networks, and some incredible friends who I just feel like, gosh, so it's so life-giving to just know them. The reoccurring thought I've had that just came up now was how different this experience might be if I wasn't a parent. And, I have a 2-year-old. And so I think that's also a part of why I feel so in the mix of it, or at least so willing to dive into all of it. We were literally signing papers for our son to enter a daycare preschool hybrid out of a really sweet little home the week that we went into shutdown in California. So just on the precipice of our family doing this next initiatory step with our child, having care outside of our home, and, expanding and growing through being socialized, and which is, for any of the parents out there, it's so critical for young people to become socialized. I mean, we are, and we understand right now through our lack of ability in some ways to be together, how that's impacting us. But for our little people, it's a core part of our development, into becoming really compassionate, empathetic people that know how to play together and share. Feeling like just the loss around that for my son, and also the way that we literally lost child care overnight. And both my partner and I definitely work full time, and the way that we've just been stretched so thin, in the first half of all of this, it was us having to navigate cutting hours and working madly when he was taking a nap, and then he would go to sleep. And then it's like, for the both of us, had a bulk of working hours that we had to put in, between like 7 to 2 a.m. just to keep everything going, make sure that the bills are paid and we have our basics covered. And now, we've opened up to some childcare support from different family members, and we've been able to get really creative in how it is that we're navigating. I feel like we've found whatever form of a balance we can, but also just still feeling like, wow, we wish our child could go to school so bad. It's a core part of being a little person, is making friends. There's been moments where we've had our son, we're outside walking and we'll go by a group of kids and they're all, in like a family pod together and they're playing. And it's just been heartbreaking because he doesn't have a sibling, and he'll just literally stop walking and can't be budged and just stands there. And it's like, yeah, it makes my heart hurt because he's so lonely in his experience right now. And as parents, we can't be his playmates in the way that he needs playmates his size and his age. So just seeing your child's yearn is really hard. Yeah, I think that's how I've been navigating so much of this, is through the eyes of a 2-year-old and the experience of a 2-year-old who all of a sudden doesn't have access to a public library anymore, to a playground, which used to be a part of our daily routine with him, and only limited playmates vetted as a family, or, the family, we're all feeling like we're in the same page as far as safety goes. And I would say my practices, the name of my own personal project is Earth Is Ohana. Ohana is the Hawaiian word for family, with this deeper understanding of responsibility of care. So what it means to be a part of a family, the responsibility you hold as a family member, present day, and also for the future. I would say that that's really what my practices have been around, is thinking about my family and what is my responsibility as a member of our Earth family, this, this bigger planetary family. But, really, like, what is my role as a parent? I think pre-parent, I would have also considered myself, like, in some ways, like, coming away from, or like stepping away from, or recovering somehow, as you shared it, from wanting to be like a really, really, really big do-gooder. As a parent, I feel like it's so not about me every day. Like, my life, it's like one of the hardest lessons when you become pregnant is like, your body is no longer just your body. As the journey continues with parenting, you realize your life is not really about you. Your work doesn't become about you anymore. It becomes about this person that is both a part of you and outside of you. I don't know what language I would use now to, like, where I would situate myself on, like, the scale of, like, trying to do good or not. Like, I don't think of it that way. It's just more of a, like, how do I parent, and how do I parent well? And how do I parent so that I can at least tell my child I tried my hardest in a time where it's just collapse this year? I can't promise safety. I think that's probably been one of the hardest lessons that every parent knows, pre all of this moment. You can't promise safety. It's not what it's about. I can't promise a better world in some ways, but what I can promise is to show up every day really honestly, about what it is we're dealing with and what it is we're facing and what my skill sets are, and try my hardest to bring my skills in whatever way possible. I think I wish sometimes to remember that lighter part of myself, but at this moment in time with a 2-year-old and just the day-to-day grind of bringing impossible pieces together, I just feel very in my human experience, and I'm actually okay with it. I think this, like, becoming a parent, you are forced to grow such incredible amounts of compassion because you look around and you see all these other parents and other caregivers literally making the impossible possible. It makes your heart beat stronger. You want to be a part of that movement. So yeah, that's where I've been at. I really appreciate your perspective and your story though right now. I feel like you're holding a light at this moment in time. Like as I'm talking to you and we're on Zoom for those of you that are listening, and I see your face and I see your eyes. Like I see you holding like you're like a light bearer right now in this like big tunnel we're in. And that is important. That's really important. So just honoring divergent perspectives, different roles a little bit here and there, but I see you. It's important.
Thank you. I mean, I feel like we're all dealing with our disappointment and our struggle and our challenges with this time. For me, not being a mother is one of those,
Yeah.
And having had a breakup last year, I was looking forward to this year being the year of, a new relationship and motherhood and opening up. And then instead it's been like very different to that. But I guess in my own version of Ohana, what I have been asked to take responsibility for is that this community who are people that care about our future being more beautiful than what we're living in right now. And I've been on the caregiving side of elderly parents. That's been inviting me into a different kind of presence. And then I've been on Zoom like hours every day, so many hours. And today I didn't have any Zoom calls until this evening, which so that's also part of like this joy face, because I got to just like be with nature and with myself quite a bit more today than I have had space for. Yeah, we're all having moments with it all at different moments. Maybe we've caught me in a moment where I'm feeling pretty light and joyful.
It's so important. I actually I don't want to infringe on that honest truth of where you're situated right now. And it's so funny. I'm just in it. I've been thinking of the phrase really, frequently, like, how do we just let each other be? I'm appreciating in this conversation that, like, I see you shining over there and it makes me happy. I want to be celebrating people who are celebrating for whatever reasons it is that they have to feel joy. Like that joy needs to radiate and it needs to be honored and it needs space. And like I said, like you literally look like a shining light right now in your eyes. And I'm appreciating that I can just be just in this moment, which is a little heavier and a little bit murkier. I guess at this point too in life, I've realized it's all phases, and kind of like we're in this house with this tin roof, and like it sounds like we're just in this like wave, and it's like that sounds, it's fleeting. It's gonna pass.
Yeah, for sure. This women's summit that we hosted, it was called Style and Presence, a reclamation of worth. Something that was really coming to me was this thing about the relationship between our self-worth and the worth of the world, the worth of Earth, the worth of people that work in factories in other parts of the world to create products that are used or not used very much. and also the relationship with our innate worth within all of that. Being with, there was like around just over 1,000 women gathered that weekend, and just being in that presence with that particular intention, and being at this time of the inner light shining. Yeah, it's like reinvigorated something in me that I'm feeling, because I do feel that a very important aspect of our activism, for any movements of social justice, is that we have enough energy. What I'm understanding through really exploring the ways of the feminine, we can take it in turns as well. Like right now, I have more energy, so I can go and do some stuff, and you can rest a bit and recharge. Like in a little while, I'm going to need to step back, and I know that you'll step forward. And that for me is community. And I feel like that's something that has taken me some time to really learn, because I really used to think I had to always do it myself, always had to be there, push, like make things happen. I don't know why I'm talking about being a recovering change the world person today. I don't know why. That's just what's coming, because in a way, when you were talking about shared values, we care about each other. We just do. You can tell us that she's different and he's different, and they're this and this, they're doing this, and this is dangerous because of that. We can keep being told all these stories, but innately in us, we care about each other. We care about those around us. And often in local communities, we care about people and we don't even know what their politics are, and we'll do nice things for them. That's part of the reclaiming of my wholeness as an activist at the moment, as a sacred activist, is saying, yes, like we do care. Of course we care. Why do we keep talking about, like, you know, whether we have to care or we should be caring, or if people care enough? It's kind of interesting, just that whole paradigm of what activism is. There's people that care and people that don't care. And the reality is that we all care. We just have different information or different needs or different perspectives. And so I really like your inquiry. How can we come together through what we care about? Because those things are actually very similar. And then what opens up from that?
I think often, you know, when I kind of put on my like strategic political analysis hat, I think about framing all the time. And, you know, when I listen to a news story or I read a post that someone puts together, and it's really like information heavy, I'm always thinking about the way that they're framing what they're bringing forward and what it is that they're actually conveying that is maybe a little more subtle somehow. Sometimes it's obvious. I've been thinking about how we can reframe so much of this moment. You know, as you're saying, the question is not, do you care? But maybe a framing of how can we implement and act so that our children can go back to school? How is it that we can invite and garner in some type of very inclusive invitation that most people want to get behind? You know, I think we can all agree that our children are precious. Our children are deserving of an education. For some children, school is a place to be fed. School is nourishing. It's safe. How can we make sure that our children can go back to school? That's a much more interesting framing to work from, rather than you don't care or I question if you are a caring person or not. So I've been thinking about that. How can we reframe invitations for each other that are oriented towards one, life-giving sustenance, and also to community care. Let the other kind of more pointed, painful kinds of ways that we're deciding to, I don't know, kind of just less finger pointing. The day after the US elections, I listened to a conversation between Rebecca Solnit and Terry Tempest Williams. It was so beautiful. I mean, some of my favorite authors. And Terry Tempest Williams had asked a question around how do we shift away from activism that is projected out, this like speaking out at people, towards one of reflective activism. I think a huge question, instead of asking out, to people outside of ourselves, how do I change you, or how do I get you to change your perspective? Instead, asking ourselves, how am I changed? How am I impacted? What's a moment in my life where my perspective has been widened? What did it take for me to arrive there? I know for me, when I have a shift in a perspective, when I've, changed a narrative, it often takes time. And there's a level of it that is deeply intimate and personal. It's not public, not publicly processing me changing my mind on a platform to thousands of people. It's not how it happens for me. It happens through me, journaling and taking time to research, read books on my own. And then once I've, and taken some information, having a conversation or conversations with people in my life who I feel are safe enough for me to ask questions and for me to really be in a place of humbleness of, I don't know, and I'm trying to understand, and can you help me understand? That might take years. And then I might actually have formed a real opinion or real thought structure that I can feel like, okay, this is solid. This is stable. I've taken the time. I have a foundation, of real understanding for why this is what I believe, or this is why I feel this way about a topic or an issue. Wanting to just ask people to really sit with themselves and ask how they are changed, and to allow each other a bit of grace in that process. Because I have a feeling that I'm not alone in how intimate and how much time it takes to really chew and digest on these big issues.
And as you say that, it makes me go, yeah, okay, so maybe something big has happened this year, but it's just happening quietly, quiet revolutions inside of people's hearts and minds. And we're yet to see the bigger shifts from it. Because you can take a perspective where you're like, oh, but like, how come nothing's happened since March? Or like with race, like, okay, there was a lot of Instagram and there was a lot of like suddenly talking about it in book sales, but then what's happened? And of course, it takes time, right? To unlearn white supremacy.
Yeah, I think it's one of these, and again, I'll just speak for myself, but I find a tension point in my own mind and in my own body is that point of just literally knowing that we can't, even by presenting all the facts and all the information to someone, you can't make someone skip a process that you have had to go through as well. Even just on the topic of climate change, this is something I've like rolled around in my head for years and years. Like, how do we get people to understand? And so that point of tension of somehow having to allow spaciousness and a sense of grace as people move through a topic that for us might seem so obvious. It looks really clumsy, the way that they're kind of navigating it. And also the times are urgent. That quote from Bio, the times are urgent, we must slow down. One of my most favorite quotes. It makes so much sense to me, but it is a real tension point because the times are urgent. I'm thinking about climate change and fires I'm thinking we should have been doing this yesterday. But the fact of the matter is that we don't have enough consensus within our community and enough real understanding and education within my neighborhoods to implement what needs to be implemented, to have the buy-in around some of the action items. We literally just can't skip over that. We need each other as large movements, I think, in order to actually overcome some of these big systems that continue to kind of stall us out. So if we don't allow each other to come together, I don't think we're going to be successful. And it's definitely a deep time perspective. Yeah, I get the tension point. I get that people continue to die because of racist policies that go unchecked, and administrations who are unwilling to, look at these real issues of systemic racism. Yeah, it's a matter of life and death for people. But I'm also seeing that it's going to take time. I haven't been able to figure out a way around that point.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like that's why Bio's words are so powerful, and everyone that hears them, it's always like, what? Like, for our friends listening, we're talking about Bayo Akomolafe, who's been on this show a couple of times. And yeah, that invitation is quite hard for our conditioned minds to get our heads around, right? Because it's not something we can get our head around. It's like, it involves like the whole body, and not just my body, but it's a community body, right? Not just your body, but a community body that we have to embrace that with. And yeah, I mean, we have all slowed down this year in some ways, and in others we've felt busier than ever. And for many, like, there's not really any time for oneself with the family care and all of that. But something happens when you can't like escape. Something happens when you can't just say, well, I'm just going to go to the cinema, or like, I'm going to go to this event, or I'm going to go to this other country. Something does happen as you root deeper into wherever you are. And we don't know yet what that is. I'm curious what's been arising as you've been doing this work with Kate around 2021.
Well, our theme for the whole year, and also for the 2021 annual publication, is death and birth, and the cyclical nature of those two in conversation with each other, with these overarching themes of doulaship, midwifery, and rematriation. We feel powerfully about the fact that we are at the cusp of a shift from a patriarchal system over to a remembrance of matriarchy, and what it means for the divine feminine to actually be able to rise back into power and in balance again with the masculine. That's the world we are tending to and what we believe in. And a part of that is a real honoring and an understanding that birth and death are intricately linked, inherently tied, and both deserving of acknowledgement and honoring. So wanting to honor the people who tend to those portals and threshold spaces. We feel very excited about 2021. We just said, regardless of what the world brings, or what the news brings, I think it's often easy to be in the space of like, to always feel a bit on the receiving end. But we decided we want to be out there actively shaping, actively carving what it is that we want to see more of. So that's what we're orienting ourselves toward. And yeah, we have some really beautiful and very exciting offerings plans that I can't wait to share more about at the beginning of January. We have like a whole 2021 menu that we're in the middle of curating right now.
Beautiful. I love that invitation. How can we find out more? Where do we go to find out what's on offer in January?
Loam, Loam, love.com is the best place. And you can follow us along on Instagram. We're at Loam Love. And I'm also on Instagram at Earth Is Ohana. My site is also just earthisohana.com. And I'll be available for taking on some clients for facilitation and consulting specifically. So if any of those themes ring out to you, I'm also excited to be able to offer myself in terms of supporting projects and visions and initiatives that want to blossom next year.
Beautiful. It feels like a really lovely place to close in that excitement of what is being birthed right now. We don't know what exactly will be born whilst we're in this birthing phase.
Yeah, it's exciting. I think that has been, just as a closing thought, at the beginning of the pandemic, I really felt this is, we're in labor right now, and labor is laborious. It's hard work. It's our ability to tap into our bodies and to sense into the intuition of both the child that is moving through the bones and the body that is birthing. It's inherently traumatic. It's so worth it for the other end, for the capacity that's grown and the realization of how incredible we each are. I know we're making it to the other side. We are moving through bones right now. And that's hard work. And I look forward to meeting all of you again on the other end and seeing who we've become through this process. Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's my pleasure. And I just want to share Valerie Kerr's words. What if the tomb is the womb, that she has been sharing from her book, Revolutionary Love. And just as you're speaking, you were mentioning about how we know Will Scott. And I was sitting next to Will at Bioneers last year when we were watching Valerie, and it was very moving. And just these words, what if the tomb is the womb, they're very powerful as we really embrace this space of death and rebirth.
Exactly. Thank you for sharing those words. And thank you for tuning in to all the listeners that shared space with us today. We appreciate you.
Thank you for spending your precious time with us. As always, you can find links to everything we mention in this episode, download our book, and discover so much more over on the blog. We don't believe in selling you things you don't need through this podcast, and so it's made possible with you, our community. If you loved this and would like to fund our show with a monthly donation or join our online group to connect with other listeners, please visit www.thefutureisbeautiful.co and click on Community and Support. Please also share with friends, hit subscribe, and leave us a review so we can grow. Those gold stars really help others find us, so these ideas can spread. Here is to us, creating a beautiful future together. The Future is Beautiful is made by an all-female team working voluntarily or on reduced rates until our listener support grows. If you have been moved by anything you heard here, please donate the equivalent of buying us a drink. All donations make a huge difference to us and will allow us to keep doing this and remain advertising free. Until next time, I leave you with this question. How will you create beauty in the world?